Marshall sheets. So I'm a cooper. I worked out at the Colonel Winsberg Foundation. I've been down there about 10 years, 9 of which were practicing as a cooper. So I went through a traditional apprenticeship under a master cooper. He served his apprenticeship at a brewery in London, Whitbread Brewery. And the master that he learned under served a traditional apprenticeship going all the way back to the 18th century. So master to apprentice, and so on and so forth. So I'm just next in line, so I've learned using traditional tools, traditional methods. In fact, our goal is to preserve the skills and the processes of the given trades that we practiced after Colonel Winsberg by practicing them, by making goods. So flour barrels, buckets, tobacco hogsheads, gunpowder kegs. What a cooper produces, in fact, the word cooper is derived, or is essentially a corruption of a Latin word meaning container maker. So
the what?
Arius is the Latin container maker.
Container maker.
But the kinds of containers that we produce are very specialized. We don't do ceramics, we don't do boxes or crates. We make round wooden containers for the anatomy of a cask. We have staves, which are the vertical slats. You have hoops, which essentially hold them together. And you have heads, which are the tops and the bottoms of the containers. Everything that we produce, well, just about everything, is circular and also conical. So barrels are bigger in the middle, tapered and essentially 2 cones connected in the base. But buckets and tubs, a single cone truncated at one end. So why barrels and buckets are so important? Well, buckets, not as important. I mean, they're domestic containers for hauling water, milking the cow, so pretty important stuff. But the vast majority of coopers never made buckets and tubs. They focused almost entirely on making casks. Casks were important because they were shipping containers. So George Washington employed multiple coopers, slaves and freemen, to make flour barrels, fish casks, later on whiskey barrels, distilled spirits. He also had them making some buckets and tubs occasionally up at the mansion house, but predominantly they're making, well, flour barrels more than anything else, really. In fact, Washington wrote down, and Jefferson, both independent of each other, both had coopers, both had flour mills, grist mills, and they had their coopers making an average of between 4 to 6 flour barrels per day. So once you've gone through the apprenticeship, you acquire the skills, you have mastery of the tools. All the shaping is done essentially freehand, just by eye. You should be able to produce a bucket in an hour, and depending on the type of cask and the size, a few hours to make the cask. So larger liquid type barrels might take the better portion of the day, but a flour barrel, yeah, 5 or 6 a day. But barrels were shipping containers for mainly one simple reason, and that's because you can do this. In a world without four-person cranes, one person can tip over 300 pounds or 1,000 pounds of product, whether it's tobacco or whale oil or sugar or molasses, and just roll it down the road, down the wharf, onto a ship, into a hold. It saves you a lot on handling costs and shipping costs. So, and not to mention, because of the circular shape and the compound arch here, this is about the strongest wooden structure ever made by man. And it can be made liquid tight to ship liquids if it needs to be. Although the vast majority of barrels were made for shipping dry goods, especially here in Virginia. But so let me go ahead and I took the head out of that cask last year, but I want to put the head back in it for you guys. And I need a special tool for that. So a cooper would make the cask, and generally speaking, you'd have a laborer take the head out and then actually fill it full of, in this case, flour. 196 pounds of flour. Virginia had very strict laws dictating what size a cask had to be for a particular product. Tobacco hogsheads, which is a large cask that would hold approximately 1,200 pounds. Legally, it had to be no less than 850 pounds gross weight when it was full. It had to be 4 foot tall, 30 inches in diameter at the ends, and made of oak that was at least 1/3 of an inch thick, seasoned for at least a year. Flour barrels, they could be made of oak or chestnut or pine, whatever. They didn't specify the type of wood, but they did have to hold 196 pounds. And they specify the length of the staves as well, and the diameter of the head. For putting the head in this particular case, because I've already cut a groove around the inside, putting the head in is just a matter of putting it down inside the container and then pulling it up, which is why I need the heading device. And then back on. I might have to tighten up my booze hoop. These are booze hoops. This is the booze, the bilge, the belly of the cask. and then these are chimers. The ends, the staves, that's the chime. And it's generally speaking the most vulnerable and weakest point of cast. You're using a hoop driver to grip the hoop, and then your hammer. And a Cooper's hammer is usually between 3 to 5 pounds. So it's like a small sled to drive those rings tight. Just boost you a little bit more.
Marshall, you're putting that on very specific way. Are there marks that tell you where to put what?
I line the rivets up. In general, I line the rivets up on how the head is oriented because wood compresses more cross grain than with the grain, and so it actually prolongs the life of the container by aligning the grain in accordance with the lap on the hoop, because there's more pressure here because of this rivet in the lap. For liquid type containers, say for beer or wine, it also tells the laborer where to drill your bunghole to fill the cask, and then later where to drill the tap hole where you're going to put your spigot or tap to empty the cask.